Hi, and welcome to our Caucus for Women in Statistics 50th Anniversary Interview Series. In celebration of our 50th anniversary in 2021, we are interviewing our past presidents. This interview features Nancy Gordon, our 1985 president, and I will be interviewing her. I'm Jessica Kohlschmidt, the Executive Director for the Caucus of Women in Statistics. Hi, and welcome to our Caucus for Women in Statistics 50th Anniversary video series. We are recording this in celebration of our 50 years of being a caucus. This interview features our 1985 president, Nancy Gordon, and I'm the Executive Director for the caucus, Jessica Kohlschmidt, and I will be interviewing her. All right. So, Nancy, would you like to tell us how you became part of the Caucus for Women in Statistics?
Yes, I would, because it was a fun time. Beva Kara, who was president of the caucus in 1981, and a longstanding friend of mine, insisted that I participate in the JSM session that she was organizing for that year. And she was really determined that the quality of the session would be good. Evidently, one before had not been so terrific. And she had confidence that I would be able to deliver. And the meeting was in Detroit, and that had the side benefit to me that I could go across the river to Windsor, which is where I grew up, Windsor, Ontario, Canada. And so that was all worked fine. So before Bea and I were about to have dinner with Janet Norwood, Janet held out her hand and said, "Give me $6." And I blinked. But of course, I fished a 10 out of my purse and I handed it to Janet. And I don't know if you know, Janet Norwood was the Commissioner of Labor Statistics for some time and a really very, very well-known, influential government statistician and president of the ASA and so on, and a mentor for me. So anyhow, she said to me, "Congratulations, you're now a member of the caucus and you've made a $4 donation," and turned and handed the $10 bill to Bea. We went off to dinner. I never thought anything about it. I paid my dues. Life was fine. Then I got a phone call, and it was from the chair of the nominating committee for the caucus that year. And it was a somewhat confused conversation until I realized and said, "You need a candidate who can lose." And she said with embarrassment, "Well, yes." So I said, "I can do that for you. What's the next step?" And she told me that I should write up what I would do if I was elected. So I said, "What should I say?" And so she reamed off 3 things. I wrote up 3 little paragraphs. I sent it in and I forgot all about it. Sometime later, I got another phone call. It was the same nice lady. And what she said was, "You won." Okay, so that was the beginning of 4 years on the executive committee. And that 4 years was really lovely. The people were all hardworking and devoted. And I got 2 good friends out of this activity. Jane Gentleman was the caucus president before me, and Arlene Ash was the caucus president after me. And we had a lot of common interests. And Jane was from Washington, even though she was working in Canada at the time. And so we've both I don't know that Jane and Arlene know each other, but I've stayed in touch with the 2 of them ever since, which is a quite long-standing relationship. So I think, so that's how I became a member of the caucus. And, still am, continue to pay dues, make charitable contributions. All of this is good because it's an excellent organization. And it's really wonderful to see how much it's grown since 1985.
Thank you. We appreciate that. What was your most memorable part of being the caucus president?
Well, the year that I was president was the year that the caucus celebrated its 15th anniversary. So 35 years ago. I can do the math when it's that simple. And the executive committee decided that we should hold a celebratory reception, something more than we had done in earlier years. And the ASA president graciously agreed that we could use his suite. Now, this was in Las Vegas. The suites were for high rollers. So this was an acre of a suite. I mean, it was huge. So good. But dues at that time, I think, were only $6 a year. So there was no way that the caucus could really fund the cost of this reception. So several of us said, okay, we'd contribute whatever the cost was that was over the budget that the caucus had. So that's fine. And there was no way that we could pay the hotel for the food and beverages. So one of the members of the caucus, who was going to arrive in Las Vegas a few days early, volunteered to go do the shopping. And so she got the, cheese and crackers and potato chips and pretzels and wine and soft drinks and water, and stashed it all in her hotel room. Perfect. So I arrive in Las Vegas, day passes or so. I've just finished getting dressed for the reception when the phone rings. And it's this lovely volunteer in a complete panic. "There's an armed guard," she said, "outside the suites. Las Vegas, lots of money, armed guard." All made sense, but not expected. So, okay, I raced to her room with my suitcase. It was when suitcases on wheels had just come out and the design left a lot to be desired. So it was pulled in the wrong direction and by a strap, a bendable strap. So it fell over extremely easily. But nonetheless, you could pull it. So I went to her room. We filled up the suitcase. It was really heavy. I pulled it to the elevators, down to the main lobby, across a huge amount of slot machines, to the other bank of elevators to go up, went to the top floor, had to go around to the third bank of elevators, which is what went up to the suites. I mean, they took security pretty seriously. I get off and I am walking towards the armed guard. I'm tilted about 45-degree angle because I'm pulling the suitcase and it's very heavy and I'm feedering on my high heels. And I get there and I say who I am. I'm going to suite number so-and-so, and he smiles and lets me in. Great. I'm sure he wondered why somebody who could go into a suite like that didn't have a porter for the suitcase. But he didn't say anything. So I went in, and then we had a series of caucus members who would take the emptied suitcase, carry it to the elevator bank, go through the elevator banks, the three of them, to get back to the room with the supplies, refill, and then drag it back to the suite. And each time a different person did this. Now, the guard was really charming because he just smiled. He didn't laugh. He knew full well that all these women were not staying in that suite. And most importantly, they did not all have identical suitcases. So we got everything in there, and just in time for people to arrive, we had it all set up. Life was good. But there had been one more challenge in the time leading up to the reception. And that is that the executive committee had thought that it was a really good idea to invite all of the women ASA fellows to the reception to join in the celebration. And so we had to invite them. Well, getting a list of fellows was the easy part. Figuring out who were women, not so easy. We could get rid of John and Donald and Robert, but there were a lot of names from other cultures with which we were not familiar. So my assistant spent hours on the phone, different parts of the State Department, the Library of Congress, anything anybody who knew about the problem could think of. And we could not find any way to sort out what sex generally went with the names we didn't know. Google would today save us, because you Google a name, Google will tell you. And it will even tell you maybe sometimes it's for both, but not then. So time has run out. And so I decided it's only money. My money was what I was thinking. So I said, okay, we're inviting them all, because better to be inclusive than to exclude somebody by mistake. So that was fine. Didn't think of it anymore until after reception as I looked around. And there were all these men. And they were so happy to be there, right? I was making the rounds like a good hostess would. And they were just so thrilled to have been included. And I don't think any of them ever figured out that there were very few Caucasian men in the room. So it turned out to be a wonderful, wonderful experience. And that's basically what consumed me during my year as president.
That's a lot of work.
It was, but it was fun. And I was really fortunate to be in a position where it wasn't all being done by me. I really had a wonderful assistant who did a huge amount of the work. So
that is something to be thankful for. Do you want to talk about your career path in general and then things you learned on your career path, or the other way around? What would you like to do?
Oh, I think probably career path first, and then maybe the things I learned will be more obvious.
Okay.
So,
tell us how you ended up where you are. Where?
Well, the main thing is I can't keep a job. That's the short story. So I moved around. I should start by saying that my PhD is in economics. I took a minor in statistics at Stanford, which meant that I had the same amount of coursework in each department. But Stanford was a statistics department that did not know what a datum was. I never saw one. It was really a theoretical statistics department, which was fine. It's like math courses, no problem. But in the real world, an economist deals with statistics more often from the point of view of trying to figure out what's going on using data. And that was a brand new experience for me after I got out of graduate school. So I can sort of masquerade as a statistician, but I think like an economist. So my first job was at the business school at Carnegie Mellon University, which was, and still is, one of the top business schools. And they believed in collaborative work. So economists did not have their offices anywhere near another economist. So I was surrounded by somebody from marketing, finance, operations research. And that gave me a really broadened understanding of ways to think and how to go about solving problems, which I think was the beginning of learning that different experiences matter. And then I went to Washington as a bookings fellow for a year, but I got married, so I stayed here, and I was still a Canadian citizen, so I couldn't work for the government, which was fine because one of the things with the bookings fellow was you spent 9 months in a government agency. And that experience led me to swear I would never work for the government, period. So, but I needed a job. So a friend called and asked if I was interested in going to the National Academy of Sciences staff. And that seemed interesting. And it was there, and I was planning a wedding. And so that was fine. I didn't do much job search. And when I was there, Isabel Sawhill, another well-known economist, especially if you read the New York Times or the Washington Post, she often has editorials, or not editorials, columns there, called and said, did I want to consider working with her at the Urban Institute, because she was heading up a program doing research on women. And so I did a job search in the sense that I checked around about, would that be a good idea? And was there anything else that was really looked better around? And so I went to work for Bell. And so I worked on the tax system and the social security system and their impacts on women, two-earner couples, and so on, which is why we talked earlier. I wound up on Good Morning America a couple of times because it was the topics that they wanted to cover, and I happened to be the person who could talk on them. And then I got a call. I was actually sick with Legionnaire's disease for 8 weeks. I could barely answer the phone. And so, no, I couldn't come for a job interview. But, you know, if you're still looking in a while, come back. And they were. And that call was to interview for a job on the White House staff. So, yes, I would never work for the government. But, gee, the White House, it's sort of different. So I wound up working for Sarah Weddington in a completely different environment. I did not realize that by taking that job, I was putting a D for Democrat on my forehead. I figured it out within an hour or so of coming to work the first day, but it was sort of, oh, okay, well, that's fine by me, and move on. But you don't stay on the White House staff forever. And I got a call about whether I'd be interested in going to the Congressional Budget Office. And so that was the next stop in my career. And I stayed there for quite a while. And then I got fired from CBO. The incoming director thought she was being very modest. She only got rid of the director's secretary and me. I was the head of one of the major chunks of CBO. Well, you know, that was an experience. I don't recommend it, but it was a learning experience. And I wound up with a terrific job at the Census Bureau. And after 10 years doing that, I had a second terrific job at the Census Bureau. And then I finally retired. So like I said, can't keep a job. But only once was I actually forced to look for a job. That checkered experience is why I came to realize that that's what you want to arrange. For me, it was entirely accidental. But the range of experiences added so much to my ability to do subsequent jobs. I mean, when I went to the Census Bureau, I hate to say it, but I was appalled. They really did not understand how budgeting worked in Washington, even though it was a major agency. They knew the process within the executive branch, but they didn't understand what happened at the Office of Management and Budget or on the Hill, right? But I had had both those experiences. And so that was just amazingly helpful because I was in charge of the group starting a brand new program now called the American Community Survey, hundreds of millions of dollars a year and so on, but a gleam in somebody's eye back when I went to the Census Bureau. And that background really helped doing that, working on getting that program funded. Took many other people. Right, nobody gets anything done by themselves, but I was a very, shall we say, influential person in that process. I think it applies if you're an academic too, right? You can go to different institutions, different departments do things differently. You might be on leave, you might have a fellowship, or you might change jobs, but having a variety of ways to do things in your toolkit really does help out. And of course, if you're in government, you might have figured it out, agencies, and there's different branches of government, there's international organizations, and all of these places operate differently, and so you learn more, and that really helps you progress in your career along the way. There's two other things that I learned. One was that if you're in a discussion, might be a meeting or it might be standing around the coffee pot, and you're not following what is being said, the sooner you ask a question, the better. If you wait longer, it can be much more embarrassing. But also, you're probably not the only person who's not following it. And so if you ask, you get, in some sense, positive reactions from other people because they're very happy to hear the answer too. And then when I went to the White House, I really had no clue what I was doing. My job was to get money for 5 different programs that would positively affect women into the president's budget submission. And okay, what am I going to do? Well, what I did was I asked for help. I knew one person who was at OMB before. I talked to her. She put me in touch with other people. Some of the most important people who helped that I asked to help were the secretaries of people who were trying to avoid me. And they would say very quietly, if you will call back at 4 minutes before noon, I can put you through. And of course, I was calling back exactly then, and I was put through. And it was really fun. I mean, the people talking about the Defense Department and the Armed Services did not want women in the military, but the president did. And so one of my jobs was to review all of the testimony that had any impact on women. And I wouldn't clear the testimony until after I had gotten the person to understand what would be fine to say and what would not be so good to say, which is why I had to talk to the person. So it really, asking for help is amazing. People like to help, yeah, in general, and you learn so much.
So did you already share all of the things you wanted to tell us that you learned during
Well,
your career
I mean, those
development?
are if you have any questions that might trigger my memory, that's fine. But those were the three things that really came to me that I've tried to share with other people, folk coming up, that asking for help is really smart. But oftentimes people think that it's a bad thing to do. And I think it's the opposite.
It is hard to learn how to do that, I think.
It is, but I think that you're not asking somebody, how do I add two and two and what's the right answer, right? You're doing this in a situation where it makes sense that you don't know what it is that you need to know. And being dumped from a research world into a political world, it was pretty understandable that I had no clue.
Did you tell me a story about working part-time and letting people work part-time?
I totally. I think what you're thinking is that as a manager, I've always treated my jobs as 24/7. I guess that's part of starting in academia. You sort of trained that way. Not that I worked 24/7, but that I was on call 24/7. But as a manager, I had some people who were raising families, and their spouses had also demanding jobs. And I was infinitely flexible. The only rule was, because this was on the Hill where you could be infinitely flexible, was if you're not going to be able to get in when you expected to, you have to tell us as soon as you know, because there are meetings and this and that. We can adjust to your not being able to be here, but not if we don't know. And I did that because I thought it was decent, and I thought it was smart because I wanted these really good people to continue working in my group. And it worked amazingly well. People stayed for years beyond what they had expected to, because they didn't want to give up that flexibility until their kids were basically in school far enough along full time. Then they gave up the congressional service for higher paid private sector jobs. But, and the other was that I had a couple of people who really, they work better at night than during the day, and they really needed isolation to do their best work effectively. And so working at home worked fine. They could sleep during the day and work at night. And those who were honorable, who actually came back with a product, I was ever so happy to let them do that. Some people are not so devoted to working, and somehow that just never worked out for them. But again, this was all on the Hill at the Congressional Budget Office, so there was more flexibility to do things like that than there might be in a government agency. But in an academic environment, I think there's a huge amount of flexibility.
For sure. And I think it's getting better in industry.
I think that the pandemic has taught a lot of people that telework or working from home is not going to reduce productivity. If anything, it increases productivity, which is usually what happens.
I definitely think there's some people who like it's better for them to be in the office. That is where they work better. But there's other people who they positively will work better at home.
Mm-hmm. Right. And
I grew up with 5 siblings, and I used to be able to ignore anything. But now, like, I like it to be quiet when I'm working. Mm-hmm. I don't like to hear coworkers talking or, all the other sights and sounds that go on in an office, because I'm very easily distracted.
When I'm working on something, it's the total focus. And I don't understand people who have a radio station on or even playing music. To me, that just makes it hard to work, because now part of my brain has to cut that out. So I'm just like you in that regard.
Yeah, I used to work, like I actually liked working from home because I could listen to music and not have my headphones on. But during this pandemic, I don't listen to music. It's just quiet and I can just focus. So it's been interesting to see how work has changed
Hmm.
while we've all been working from home.
Yeah.
So,
So do you want to spend
um,
time back in the office? This is a
do
little.
what?
Do you want to spend some time back in the office when the world returns to a sort of normal time? Would
I
you
mean,
like?
I wouldn't mind going in part-time.
Hmm.
I think it is. I think some face-to-face is good.
Hmm.
Um, but if I want devoted days to do work, I'd rather stay home and work quietly by myself
Right. Got it.
for the most part. So we'll see. I don't, you know,
Right.
I don't know when we'll end up going back to work or how any of that will work out. So it'll be interesting to see.
It's going to take a while for vaccines to get through your age, down to your age category, I fear.
Yeah, I do work for the medical center at OSU, or the cancer center. So I
Hmm.
think I'll be on a list sooner than some people, but we're not in the lab and we don't work with patients. So those people are getting shots, but we're not.
Right. Someday, but
So
sooner than others, but not soon. Yeah.
yes, very true. Very true. Was there anything else you wanted to share about the caucus or your career or anything like that?
Nothing is coming to mind. I do think that it's a good organization, and I think that it has been effective in providing ways for especially women statisticians, but we shouldn't forget that there are a lot of guys like my husband, who was a founding person when the caucus was started that very first year, and helped with starting the Gertrude Cox run again that very first year. So there are guys who belong to the caucus and are very important to it as well. But mostly, I think the ability of getting women in a situation where they can meet other people that they can talk with and find out that they have common interests or common issues or what have you. It's really important. So I'm glad it's being so successful.
Thank you. I hope it continues to be.
Well, one would think it would, as long as
Yes.
people are willing to volunteer, put in the time as a volunteer to keep it moving forward, then it will. That's the key. It's grooming younger folk or retired folk or people who now have a little bit more flexibility to serve on committees and on the executive committee.
That's very true. We've had a lot of energetic presidents and they seem to be doing a good job finding more energetic people. So that's hopeful.
That is the key.
With ideas and thoughts and, things that they want to get done. So
excellent.